Alright guys, so today I wanted to talk about Joy-Con and mouse, JCNM or JNM. I just call it CNM, controller and mouse. I just wanted to highlight the obvious benefits, between using the left analog stick for movement and the mouse for camera work, as well as some just simple tips on using controller for survivor, mouse and keyboard for killer. It's something that I didn't honestly think was possible. I had been wanting to do it for a few years and I just assumed that it wasn't possible. I was on console at the time, and so no game that I knew of really supported mouse and keyboard. But then I saw that they made some devices with the left analog stick on like the little hand thing. I'll show some of it later in the video, but stuff like that. And that's when I knew that it might be possible. So I just tried it and it worked. And so the main thing that this centers around is its application for Dead by Daylight. I think that it is the best way of playing for both killer and survivor. I think it might be like a little bit better for killer, like a little bit more of an improvement. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Hope you enjoy the video and catch me live sometime. I plan on doing like right analog stick camera work with WASD for movement as like a worst of both worlds sort of challenge. But see you guys in the next one. So I wanted to talk about the benefits first. Obviously you get the 360 degrees of movement. It feels much better wrapping around objects when you're able to use a stick. And you also get the more slight movement, where you can move at different speeds and everything. But also, obviously, the camera, you get more precise control versus trying to use a stick, which can be kind of finicky whenever you're going to like check spot with it. Whereas the mouse just feels a lot better. You will have to have a lot higher DPI with the mouse for survivor, but that's perfectly fine. I'll be going over that. But I'm specifically here because this is a situation where it has happened to me before. And it feels like when you're right here, maybe, and you don't exactly know where the killer's coming from, you can kind of like overshoot, like trying to like I'm trying my best. Let me hug this so the pallet doesn't pop in the way. I'm trying my best to like flick back and forth, but it can't be as fast nor as precise. Like you might overshoot more than you need, making it take longer to flick to the other side. You might undershoot, something like that, and then you have to like adjust with more fine-tuned movement, which of course can be made easier by extending the right stick, but still not as good comparatively to a mouse. So with what you can do with a mouse when you're holding a sort of like middle check spot along a long wall and you're trying to flick to both spots where the killer can come from. I'm still not the best at mouse movement because I've been a controller player my whole life, honestly. I'm new to PC, but this is, I would say, by far better than just controller for survivor. Most people would agree that controller is better for survivor and then keyboard and mouse is better for killer, but that's mostly for the mouse when playing killer and for the left analog stick when playing survivor. So you can just use both, obviously. A lot of people, just like me, thought that that would be impossible. I've always thought, man, I want one of those keyboards that has a joystick. I want like something that I can actually use the joystick for movement. I never thought that using, these two things would work, but it does. And it is amazing in games other than DBD. And it's, well, also good for killer. I forgot to mention that. In fact, I would say proportionally that having controller and mouse is better for killer. It's more of an improvement for killer than it is for survivor versus just using controller, at least if you're wanting to use like the best for both. So it is, in my opinion, the best option. Honestly, any games, The main purpose of WASD is for faster strafing in FPS. You don't really need that here, and that can kind of be mitigated through controlling your dead zones, like what I'm going to talk about in a bit. But that was the benefits to it. I can go over in case you just want to watch this and be done, I can go over the controls that I have set up to where I can make the left side of the controller work alongside the mouse. So I have the standard M1 attack button, M2 for use power, and then I have M4 for power, for secondary power. I have pressing the left stick in for activate event ability. That could be changed to something else if you want. That's just what I put it on. That's definitely one that you can do whatever with. LB for activate ability 1, LT for activate ability 2. Drop survivor I have on Y, and that's because I have the GameSir G7 SE controller, so it has one back button on each side. So I have this back button mapped to Y, so I can still press it, and then M5 for picking up survivors and interactions. And yeah, that's it for killing. Onto survivor. You have LB for run, M1 for crouch. Now the reason is because there's so many times where you go to crouch and it needs to be fast because you're trying to crouch in time to dodge an attack. Huntress Hatchet, Xenomorph Tail Strike, yada yada, especially after vaulting. And so having it the most important buttons on your mouse, because it has such little latency, such little physical input lag as well, having it be M1 for crouch feels amazing. Use item is LT. It's a little bit weird, especially if you're trying to hold down for a flashlight, because you are only holding half your controller. I would honestly bear the other half down against the mouse pad, so that way you have more it's more stabilized, and whereas I used to like playing bumper and trigger with two separate fingers, I had to switch to just one because I needed my middle finger for support from just holding with one hand. But yeah, so this one you could do something differently, especially if you have more buttons on your mouse or you have two back buttons on your controller. Now I have up for drop item because it's the closest button to the left stick, and if you're dropping your item, then you're not moving, obviously, so you can afford to take your thumb off the left stick if you're planning on dropping your item. And then I have Y for the pickup item interactions for survivor. And then I have M4. Remember the most important actions to be on the mouse. M4 for my actions, M5 for my secondary actions and skill checks. Right click for activate ability 1. Now this could be the rest of these can be all three. Of the abilities can be whatever you want, but I picked right click for activate ability 1. Pressing L3 in for activate ability 2, because what I kind of noticed was that the ones where you're like just sitting on the gen and you like apply stuff or whatever I get the perks, like which one's ability 1 and 2. I get those mixed up all the time. In fact, Bardic Inspiration, no, not Bardic Inspiration. Well, Bardic Inspiration was the one that made me switch it off L3, because I would use it and I would immediately move after trying to click it in, and it would just like ruin it. But there is Dramaturgy, I think, says that it's activate ability 2, but it's actually activate ability 1. They may have fixed it by the time I post this or by the time you watch it, but you'll have to go through and maybe see if you can afford to have the left click be activate ability 2, or else I would put the event ability for the L3 left analog stick in, and then we have left click for the event ability because you don't really use it as much. Even in event game mode, it's usually like certain powers that you can afford to like take your thumb off the stick. And then I have M5 for the wiggle skill checks, just to line up with the regular skill checks. And then I have scroll wheel up for point at and scroll wheel down for follow. But I am planning on changing the scroll wheel up. That's why I have these on D-pads to where I can use them, because I would like to have the scroll wheel for whatever action or whatever I think I might need to spam on Survivor. So that's why it's like options that I have for both sides for right now, because I'm tweaking it. You will probably want to maybe tweak it for yourself anyways, because this is just something I kind of put on real quick, thinking like, okay, I might want to use controller every now and then, so I want it to still work for controller. I might want to use keyboard and mouse, so I want it to still work for that. But partway through, I kind of gave up on that. So it may seem a little weird how I have the control set up for right now. So now with all that being said, we can take it to some other things. For Survivor, because it's a third-person camera, a lower DPI can just feel so slow, so I raised it to the X-axis being 44, and then the Y-axis being 42, because I lowered the mouse sensitivity all the way down to 0 in-game, so I can control it just with DPI. That's why it's so high, but I would definitely pick a higher DPI if you haven't been using mouse and keyboard for Survivor. Then we have the controller that I use, or at least the software to change things with it. So involving the sticks, I just pretty much lowered the inner dead zone all the way to 5, because when you lower it anymore, it gives you this warning about it. Now the G7 SE, it has Hall effect sticks, which is good. The only problem compared to the standard potentiometer is that the inner dead zone can't get as small, or it's more finicky or something like that. Um, and it only has the controller itself only has one back button. So if you're wanting a different GameSir remote or a different remote entirely, I'll suggest an option later on. But I would, to mitigate the sort of strafe that I mentioned earlier, the reason why people might want WASD, for it being like you move one way, then you move the other instantaneously because it's a button. I lowered the dead zone all the way, lowered the outer dead zone a ton. That way I only have to move it 24% of the way for it to reach 100 to the max. And I also put these Control Freak sort of precision rings. You won't even be able to see it. Well, yeah, you can. I put these Control Freak little foam rings on. There was a 6-pack, 2 of each like firmness. I put on the softest ones, the green ones. They are bigger, but this is gonna sound really weird and really min-maxy, but I trimmed around the edge of it because it just felt weird, moving and feeling that resistance. So I trimmed it around the edge and like cut off the pieces that were like sticking out to make it smoother. That way it's basically just a literal cutoff. Like I can't move the stick as far, or it's much easier not to. Because whereas you can get good, at like barely clicking the stick when you need to make it more like a mouse click, instead of like having to press it all the way down and wait for it to come back up every time you want to press it, you can finagle the dead zones of the triggers to achieve like a more sort of mouse click, more quicker physical input. Unfortunately, this controller doesn't have trigger stoppers, but that's another thing. I have the foam ring. That way it's harder, a lot harder to press all the way to the edge because I don't need it because of the outer dead zone being so low. I could honestly get a better one. Maybe make one bigger, maybe choose the more firm one if you want to go the same route as me. Or maybe there's some kind of like plastic ring that can clamp onto the outside to make the circular part smaller. Maybe because it's really like if you're trying to like mid game and you have nothing to like help you and you're just trying to like keep your stick towards the middle and not push it out towards the edge in the heat of the moment, that can be insanely hard to do. And so you will typically end up just pressing it all the way. And then when you want to set back, it takes a little bit longer, especially when you want to set back and flip and go the other way. It's just a bigger distance to travel. And then, if you have software for your controller and for your mouse, up the pulling rate to at least 1,000 for both. Try to keep them equal, but I've tested it with my controller on 250, my mouse on 250, and then one on 250 and then the other on 1,000 flip flopping. I obviously just keep them in the highest pulling rate available to me, which is 1,000. If you have the option of going to 2,000, I would recommend if DBD allows it. I did see one thing one time where DBD doesn't like pulling rates above 1,000, so I wouldn't know how to do if that would work, but keep them both on 1,000. And even if you don't have an equal pulling rate between the two, like you get a mouse that goes up to 2,000 and a controller that goes up to 1,000, it should still work because, like I said, I tried the between 250 and 1,000 for each and at the same time, and so it should still work. Obviously, you wouldn't want to go above 2,000 even if DBD allows it, because some issues can start to arise from 4,000 and especially 8,000 pulling rate on any. Now, there is some issues that might arise. I haven't ran into them. So if you just do what I did, maybe with some tweaks, it shouldn't really matter. But this person, November 2022, basically some of their buttons don't work properly when they're trying to use controller and mouse together. Were the specific keybinds that they set, and it wouldn't always go unless they weren't moving the stick. I'm guessing maybe something happened or whatever, and behavior fixed it, or I somehow just got lucky. What can I say? But it works for me, at least now. And I didn't have to maybe try to do a fix. And for this one, this person, this is what I found early on. And I did it. I tried doing most of this. They basically say to make it so that Steam doesn't register as much left analog stick movement when you actually use it. Because if it doesn't register past a certain point, it will not switch over to like the controller glyphs, because you will have the repeatedly switching glyphs between controller and mouse and keyboard. If you do, because you'll constantly be moving one and both, and so it'll be switching back and forth. And then you fixed it. You like got it back to normal by inputting this in the what was it, the input.ini. But then you would have to click read only after, or else it'll reset. But that didn't work for me. And then I went to where I could rebind the controller buttons to count as mouse and keyboard, and it just wouldn't take. It might have took after the fact, because these are changed now that I'm looking at them. But I would just rather turn off the Steam input for controller. Using this, like you'll still have the left analog stick problem. You can't fix that. I use read WASD before to try and make it to where it would count, like it shows right there, to where it would count as WASD movement. And it even said, like when you're moving it diagonally, WA, SA, all that, to where you could be going like the diagonal directions, like all eight. Didn't work. Could only go the four. Did everything. Looked up guides, whatever. So you'll still run into the issue unless you really just screw yourself over and don't give yourself actual left analog stick, like use it like WASD, which I wouldn't recommend. This is the controller, by the way. I just wanted to go ahead and show the full name of it in case you wanted to get it. I would recommend getting a controller that has TMR sticks if you want to get the G7 Pro, or just getting any controller that has two back buttons on both sides, so four total. That way you have more buttons to work with, because if you are trying to play other games besides Dead by Daylight, it will be harder if it has a lot of keybinds needed. But beside controller, you can try this Frag FX Frag Chuck, just a sort of like nunchuck or Joy-Con. I don't know how well it works, and it might have a sort of issue with like the left analog stick isn't read as a left analog stick. It's like, or it is, and it just swaps back and forth. So it's constantly switching the glyphs that are telling you what buttons do what. And if not, then it's just WASD movement. So, however, I have heard that this is an option that works really well. But things like this and like that little number pad sort of thing that you can get with the control stick or the analog stick, I mean, that it's a funky, like having the stick down there, like it's not as intuitive when trying to move forward and to the sides as it would be just like you move up and you go forward from your point of view. So I really wouldn't recommend it. But as I was saying, you might not still be able to fix the left joystick. So it's not necessarily a good idea to try and use a third party software or your launcher, in my case, Steam, to sort of rebind or just trick it into thinking that when you pressed a controller button, it registered as a keyboard button to keep the glyphs from switching. Because that constant back and forth switching is what made the other two forums that I showed you, what made them think that which in their case it might have at that time, it might have made them think that that their controls and everything were only registering half the time. So even if you were to fix it, you might still run into that left analog stick problem with it only at most having 8 directions, not actually having full 360, and it might having like a single actuation point instead of sort of a dead zone. So that way you can move at different speeds. So it's like when you reach that actuation point, which might be the inner dead zone, it's just immediate. You're going like full speed, full walking speed, full running speed, which you might not necessarily want, at least on Survivor, at every single chance. So yeah, like I said, I would just go ahead and disable Steam input, even if you were to somehow get the left analog stick registering properly and still having 360 movement, or not having the launcher register they're using the left analog stick, but the game's still sort of like allowing that sort of movement. Even if you manage all of that, you still had to sort of rebind. And so you're pressing a button on the controller, so you press like LB or L1, and it sends it off to the platform, and then the platform changes it before the game takes it. So it'll be like, oh no, that wasn't LB, that was shift. And so that is technically can add latency, or at least that's what everyone says on the computer. But it will add latency. So yeah, that is basically everything you would need to know. If there is anything that I didn't cover, just ask in the comment section. As you can see from repeatedly moving my mouse and left stick, the glyphs, which are the things at the bottom that tell you what button to press to like do the action in question, in this case pulling down the pallet. I haven't really, if you don't remember your controls, like it'll take some time to get used to, and so if you're relying on the glyphs in the meantime to like know what button to press, then you'll just have to stop and only do one to see what like control it was for. But at any point you can just press the button, and it has always taken for me. I'm not entirely sure that there is any other issues that you might run into besides that. And so if for whatever reason you are ever just not able to do an action, you might need to more so recreate, or maybe we could brainstorm together what could be the issue, because I would like to look into it more, because maybe to a very small like degree, maybe like every 100th time the action doesn't take, you know. But that'll be it, and I thank you for watching.